Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast. Looks like we lost Alex there for a second, right as we're about to start recording here. So hopefully we get him back soon. Obviously, my name is Steven. I'm the host. We'll talk about a lot of news today for the Chargers. Obviously, being able to hire Kellen Moore today as their offensive coordinator, and excited to dive into all of that with my guys Tyler and then Alex whenever he gets back on the show. Tyler, what's up, man? How you doing tonight?
Doing very well. I assume that Alex left because he couldn't do anything that was related to praising the Cowboys whatsoever. So he just had to leave and get out of here.
Yeah, he just planned to be here and then realized that he had to talk positively about the Cowboys and dipped out. So hopefully we'll get him back here in a second. But like I said, obviously here to talk about the Chargers' decision to hire Kellen Moore. We'll talk about all of that, potentially what it means for the rest of the coaching staff, as well as some potential off-season moves. No, the Chargers are not going to be in on Tony Pollard and Dalton Schultz, but we'll talk about some potential connections there in a minute here. Before we get started, obviously appreciate everybody who's tuning in live today. Please make sure and like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're watching the replay. Make sure and comment on here and let us know what you think. And then obviously if you are listening to the audio version, we appreciate all of you guys on that side of things as well. We appreciate all the 5-star reviews and all the positive feedback in that regard. That being said, Tyler, let's dive in here. Things really escalated pretty quickly for this Kellen Moore news. Obviously, things kind of progressed through the kind of lack of interviews the last week, and then obviously Frank Reich gets hired. Obviously, Nathaniel Hackett gets hired as offensive coordinator, thankfully for the Chargers. It comes out Sunday evening that the Cowboys are mutually parting ways with Kellen Moore, and then less than 12 hours later, he's the Chargers offensive coordinator. So really came fast. Want to clear this up. He was not fired from the Cowboys. The Cowboys did receive the interview request from the Chargers before they decided to mutually part ways. So a lot of people have been kind of saying like, oh, why would the Chargers be excited when he got fired from the Cowboys? He didn't get fired. It was a mutually, parting of ways. And frankly, once he probably heard that Justin Herbert could be his quarterback, I'm sure he, decided to head towards Los Angeles. So Tyler, your initial reaction here as we move on from Joe Lombardi into the Kellen Moore era.
I've barely had time to process this because he was not even available 24 hours ago. Right. Yet here we are. As soon as they had the mutual parting ways, and then as soon as you got the Chargers are like an hour later are, going to, of course, as the media reported it, they're going to interview him. It's like, okay, it feels like this was a bit inspired. And now he's the coordinator. I have nothing to say about the film itself. I literally got the notification this morning. I was at work. I came home. Here I am. But just looking at the numbers last night and today, this is really just like their Ryan Ficken, but younger, for the special teams, but now for offense. He's ready to go. When you look at the Chargers' history of guys in their building, of offensive coordinators, I mean, in 2014, they had Frank Reich, Shane Steichen, and Nick Sirianni all in the building. And, where are we today? Firing Joe Lombardi and hiring Kellen Moore. The Chargers just don't have this history of developing, you could even say head coaches, but also their coordinators. All these guys did their best work elsewhere. So with someone like Kellen Moore, you don't really have to wait. There's an adjustment period, sure. This is different. They're with Herbert. They're with the different offensive personnel. All that. Sure, there's an adjustment period. But you looked at some of the names that were brought up, even like a Zach Robinson, who was a passing game coordinator. It's just not quite the same. And the Chargers don't have to really worry as much about the development. They just need to make sure he has everything he needs. And so far, at the very minimum, he has the quarterback that he never had in Dallas. Not that Dak was bad, but just in that side alone, this is great. Because I was really worried about where they were going with this hire. Because we didn't hear anything. It was just like we got one guy, we're honing in on that guy, and that's really it. And so for them to end up with Kellen Moore is fantastic. People or I should say Cowboys fans are, saying, don't let the door hit your ass on the way out. But I can't really figure out what the issue is. If you're complaining as a Dallas Cowboys fan because he wasn't like Andy Reid and a top 3 play caller in the league or something, okay, I guess. But coming from where we are at as Chargers fans who just watched Joe Lombardi, this is huge. I mean, over the last 4 years, you've seen all the stats, so I hate repeating it for some people who have already seen this, but over the last 4 years combined, the Cowboys have been 8th in EPA per play, 9th in dropback, and 9th as a rushing EPA per play. And that's with 2 separate years of Dak Prescott having, significant injuries. So if you're a Chargers fan looking for a stabilizing force, which the Chargers didn't have, one injury, right, craters the entire team. Kellen Moore, it seems, I'm sure the games without Dak Prescott were worse, but that's your quarterback. It seems like if you can be a top 10 unit over the span of 4 years, despite losing your quarterback for many, many games, I think that's fantastic. This past year, Dak was 7th in ADOT, and he was 12th in big time throw rate, which doesn't necessarily make you a good quarterback, but that lends to a certain style of offense that Chargers fans have been asking for. They were 7th in points per game this past year, 1st in red zone touchdown percentage, 5th in third quarter scoring. Again, things that we as Chargers fans want to see with Justin Herbert in this offense that we didn't get. The scheme, Arjun gave me a graph that shows variance. The scheme is more varied than the Chargers offense was last year, although that's not saying a ton, but still, we wanted to go that direction. They developed running backs. Yes. They developed tight ends. Yes. Jake Ferguson, the rookie this past year, was, I think, 10th in yards per route run among tight ends. And of course, 4th round pick. Previous before that, Dalton Schultz, 4th round pick. He's one of the best, tight ends. He's going to be making a ton of money on the open market. Did they develop linemen? Yes. Did they develop receivers? Yes. And guess what? When you develop guys like that, you probably have had good position coaches along the way. And they've got a lot of guys in Dallas at different points who have been with the team or as a position coach for that specific group for years. I think their running backs coach is on 23 years or something. So whether it's an offensive line coach or assistant coach, tight ends coach, running backs coach, receivers coach, whatever, Kellen Moore can also bring the guy that will probably take his place in, potentially a year, maybe 2 years.
Yeah.
Heck, the Cowboys themselves, the players at least, have a relationship with Duke Manyweather, who's in Texas as is. Just everything fits. I can't find a red flag. I can't find something to dislike about this. The numbers are good. It's exactly where the Chargers want to be. They're a balanced team. It's been a good offense for the Cowboys. Is it top 3 in the league? No. Will it be top 3 with Herbert? Maybe. I think it could be. But the Chargers are just getting really exactly what they seem to want, what we've wanted as fans. I think this is a home run hire. I don't really see a downside to this. But again, I have not watched the tape yet.
Yeah, that's you said about the red flags. The only negative PR right here is coming from Cowboys fans. Cowboys fans, for whatever reason, wanted a scapegoat, and they felt like Kellen Moore was the right guy. And if all you think of Kellen Moore is the ending of that San Francisco game, sure, probably you feel hey, that trick play was a bunch of bullshit. That didn't really work out. There wasn't a real plan here. I can understand that. I don't necessarily think that, them being in a no-win situation and trying to come out with a very unique trick play to try and get the ball down the field and have a last second Hail Mary kind of play. I don't think that is going to negatively impact my opinion of Kellen Moore as a play caller. If you want to talk about a pure results perspective, like you mentioned, over the last 4 years, they were consistently, in the top 10 in terms of efficiency stats, in terms of EPA, in terms of DVOA. But the way that they scored the ball was really unique, in my opinion. And I remember being so impressed with watching the film. Looks like we got Alex back. Welcome back, Alex. But I remember being so impressed with the way that they went about things on offense after, watching their film against the Chargers last year. And they are just able to be so much more multiple than anything that we are accustomed to seeing under Joe Lombardi. That adaptability was the number 1 or number 2 thing that all 3 of us wanted to see with a new Chargers offensive coordinator. And you look at the way the Cowboys have been able to use, 13 personnel, empty personnel, quarterback run game, outside zone, inside zone, duo. They were a top 5 offense this year, and it's not like they had super consistent, cohesive offensive line. Tyron Smith's in and out of the lineup. Jason Peters is starting at left tackle. Tyler Smith starting at right tackle. He's starting at left guard. Tyler Biadasz gets injured, later on in the season. They have to go through a different center. They don't really have a wide receiver 2. I mean, Michael Gallup gets paid like one, but he's not really producing like one. And yet the Cowboys offense is still producing. Like, they've produced in a run heavy offense. He's produced in a pass heavy offense. Dak Prescott throwing for, 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns or whatever it was last season. They've scored more than 40 points 8 times over the last 2 seasons. It's only happened 3 times for the Chargers, and all 3 were last year in 2021. And so, like, Cowboys fans are scapegoating the shit out of Kellen Moore, but I can't find a single negative statistic out there from when Dak Prescott was healthy. I mean, even this season with Cooper Rush, like, Cooper Rush was a practice squad player who the Cowboys had cut themselves. And, they have to turn to him from week 2 to week 6. And the Cowboys went 4-1. Like, they weren't like putting up a ton of points by any means, but I mean, Cooper Rush looked way more serviceable than any Chargers backup we have seen in frankly, probably my entire life, since maybe Billy Volek. But if whatever happens, like, if Easton Stick had to come in and start a game, like, there's no way the Chargers would win that kind of game. And Kellen Moore was able to do enough on offense to maximize Cooper Rush and be a viable backup. And was not something he had been previously. So, a lot of people who are very happy about Kellen Moore in Dallas, I think, should be very careful of what they're about to experience, because Mike McCarthy is reportedly going to call plays for them, and that is not going to be pretty. So from the Chargers perspective, I think this is about as good as you could possibly get. It seemed like they were kind of operating and just waiting to see maybe we can get Frank Reich, maybe we get a bigger fish. If not, hey, we really like Zach Robinson and we'll pivot to that area. But, this happening, I think, was absolutely the best case scenario for the Chargers and getting, Kellen Moore to guide the next stage of the offense. Alex, welcome back, man. Initial reaction and thoughts to Kellen Moore and being the offensive coordinator.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Just wanted to make sure you guys can hear me okay. But no, I thought Kellen Moore was absolutely a great hire. I didn't think it was the direction that was possible 3 days ago, because it seemed like Kellen Moore was going to remain the offensive coordinator, although the Cowboys were just kind of non-committal on what they were going to do. And then Kellen Moore ends up losing this kind of power struggle, it seems like, to Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy now will be kind of the play caller. I don't know if it was a mutual parting of the ways or he was fired. The answer probably is somewhere in the middle. But I think Zach Robinson would have been a fine candidate if the Chargers wanted to go down that road. However, at the same time, it just didn't make sense. You needed a non-first-time OC, and so for the Chargers, who just needed a more experienced candidate, this is why we talked about Frank Reich and why Frank Reich was number 1 on all of our lists. It wasn't because, like, we viewed him as this generational coordinator, but it was, hey, he maximizes your quarterback. That's what the Chargers need to do, and he has a lot of experience calling plays. And that's as simple as it was for the Chargers here in terms of going for Kellen Moore after everything had happened. So for me, Zach Robinson probably would have been a fine hire, but Chargers just needed a more experienced guy. And I think Kellen Moore is definitely the person who can unlock this offense. And if Brandon Staley wants to tie his name, in this year to one person that can save it, Kellen Moore right now is his best chance.
Alex, I do want to ask, because you're the only one who willingly watches NFC East football. Not that you watch the Cowboys, but twice a year at least you do. Why would Cowboys fans be excited about this? Like, what are some reservations we should have about Kellen Moore? Not that I expect you to know the scheme or anything, because I certainly haven't watched the film myself, but like, what have some of the problems been with this offense? And why would Cowboys fans be like, yeah, this is a good move?
I mean, I think anytime the Cowboys offense wasn't struggling, but obviously the Cowboys in the playoffs haven't gotten to where they wanted to get to. And, you kind of look at their offense, and in that 49ers game, right? Now, not every team can have a great offensive performance against the 49ers. Of course, that is something that is just very hard for some NFC East teams to do. But I do think that when you talk about the Cowboys, right, they've kind of tied themselves to Zeke Elliott, right? Obviously, that's something that's been there for a while. They couldn't really give Tony Pollard the full RB1 because of the money they paid to Zeke. And then you kind of are looking at their offense, and as soon as Tony Pollard goes down in that Niners game, right, it was sort of like, I think Cowboys fans interpreted that as Kellen Moore didn't have anything else to go to. But it's also like, what was he supposed to go to? Like they tried CeeDee Lamb like screens a bunch. They tried getting him open in that sense. But like they just didn't really have anything else on offense, and letting Amari Cooper walk was a huge loss for them at the end of that game, and they just couldn't get the offense moving. So I think people interpret it as change is a good thing, just in general, whenever you fire an offensive coordinator. But again, like we just talked about, giving Mike McCarthy more power. If you want to see how Green Bay ended, his tenure there before Mike LaFleur came in, not always the best idea. So I think there's a general theme of change and how it's going to go for that from that sense. But to me, Kellen Moore didn't really do anything wrong. I think you can look at his game plans and say that he ran on second down a little bit more frequently than he should have, but also like establishing the run is a Mike McCarthy principle, right? If you're the offensive coordinator, and this is what Kellen Moore is going to try to do now under Brandon Staley, like you kind of have to follow what your head coach wants to do, right? And so obviously Kellen Moore is going to call the offense himself, and it's going to be Kellen Moore's offense, but it's also going to be Brandon Staley's offense. And Brandon Staley wants that West Coast, throw that shit down the field, right? Then you're not going to get that kind of Cowboys scheme, right? Because Brandon Staley, and I'll give respect to Brandon Staley because I haven't given much respect to him recently. I think that Brandon Staley could have gone in the direction of just going to the McVay tree and getting Zach Robinson and doing all that kind of stuff, and just kind of like continuing that. But I think him going to a proven offensive coordinator, even if it's not a seamless fit with what he wants to do offensively, I do think he deserves some credit for that in that sense. So for me, I think you can blame Kellen Moore and for some of the things that happened in Dallas, but like Steven was saying, to scapegoat Kellen Moore and then just run it back with Dak Prescott and Mike McCarthy and act like that's going to fix all your problems, no, that's just not how the blame game works in terms of calling offense.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And like I was saying earlier, I mean, by the end of that San Francisco 49ers defense, you're going up against the best defense in the NFL with, Noah Brown and Dalton Schultz. And yeah, those players are fine. And I think Dalton Schultz is a really good tight end. But when you don't have your explosive playmakers, it makes things very difficult, as we all saw the entire year this season watching the Chargers. And so I think there's a lot to like with Kellen Moore in terms of the schematic fit. I am very curious to see what becomes of the Kellen Moore offense because, obviously he's very influenced by Chris Peterson and his days from Boise State. And there was this great article by Stephen Ruiz last year of the ways that Kellen Moore would use a lot of formational advantages to get guys open in space, in particular, the ways that they would use like bunch sets out of empty packages and put essentially doing a lot of 4x1 formations in very creative ways. And that was kind of a Chris Peterson staple. But in terms of who he's been in the NFL, it's been a lot of everything. It hasn't been like he's purely a Shanahan guy or he's purely a Peyton guy or he's purely a Reed guy. Like they do a lot of everything. And I think that should appeal to Chargers fans because they're going to have different tools in their toolbox, like I was talking about, being adaptable. And, they're able to go into a game against a team like the Chargers and say, hey, we're just going to wide zone the shit out of you. And we're just going to run at your weak points. And, we're going to isolate Jerry Tillery and Kenneth Murray. And we're going to run for 198 yards and you're not going to be able to stop us. And, they can go into a game against the Eagles and say, hey, like, pre-Linval Joseph and Dominican Sue, like, hey, you don't have Jordan Davis today. We're just going to run duo and we're just going to run behind Zach Martin. And obviously the Chargers don't have Zach Martin, but they're able to be multiple and be versatile and adapt to the strengths of the opponent that they are playing. Like that's not something that the Chargers have had previously under Joe Lombardi, and frankly didn't have under Shane Steichen when he was offensive coordinator either. It was always like, we're going to run our stuff. And if it doesn't work, we don't have an answer for you. Like we're just going to be stuck and we're just not going to score points, barring, some elite quarterback play. So it's an interesting perspective because Moore is going to have essentially full autonomy of the offense. Like this is going to be in his image. He's not going to have Jerry Jones. He's not going to have Mike McCarthy, breathing down his neck and saying, hey, we have to be a 50-50 split team. And you have to feed Ezekiel Elliott the football instead of Tony Pollard or let Dak cook or whatever you want to say. So from a schematic standpoint, it is going to be very interesting to see how Kellen Moore and Brandon Staley kind of put their heads together and, mold this offense, because Brandon Staley he came out and said like he wants to, to be kind of that Sean McVay kind of offense. And while the Cowboys have had the ability to do that, it wasn't something that they were majoring in. So I'm curious to see how kind of the brain trust here melds together once, Kellen Moore gets, into the swing of things going forward.
Yeah, and I'm just curious what kind of power they're going to distribute to someone like Kellen Moore, who's not like a veteran, like long-time coach like Ryan Ficken, but he's been in the league long enough and had enough success over the years with one specific team for them to at least trust him, I would believe. So I'm hoping that whether it's before the season, free agency, the draft, or during the season, that they're able to distribute some power to Kellen Moore to say like, hey, do you need something like right now? Can we help you in some way? Do you need this? You need another speedy receiver or something? Because the special teams had power. Brandon Staley obviously had the power. Never really felt like Joe Lombardi did. And that's something we talked about before they hired anybody or did any interviews. And so I'm really thinking someone like Kellen Moore can at least get more of what he wants. And I think that will be very beneficial to this offense.
Yeah, I reached out. Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say really quickly, like, I think the personnel is going to be really interesting here too, because, I mean, if you look at what the Cowboys have done, they kept 6 receivers this year, right? In terms of their initial opening day roster, and kept it throughout the season. I know Tyler's praying right now. It would be really cool if the Chargers can kind of emulate that, and instead of doing the 4 wide receivers, 1 returner thing that they've been doing for so long, so you can't just say that okay, well, the running backs are Jerry's decision, and then this is someone else's. But like, sure. I do think with how much Kellen Moore wants to utilize the vertical part of the field and get that A-dot up, like I just think that you're going to see, especially when we talk about adding speed to the offense, right? Because let's say the Chargers don't cut Keenan. Let's say that they keep this Keenan, Mike, Josh Palmer thing going. If you're only going to have 4 true wide receivers and then maybe like a DeAndre Carter or something as your returner, it's hard to add speed because you only have 1 wide receiver spot left, right? If you can add 2 more receivers to that, or who are, let's say 5 of which are going to be optimal on game day out of those 6, like it's just such an advantage for your offense. And Pandasaurus Rex says in the chat, it's sad that we're excited we might have 6 receivers, but like that's what watching this Joe Lombardi offense, like with the pieces that it has been. So I mean, just updating it to be a more, I guess, modern, like retrofitted offense to what Staley wants in this West Coast scheme, I think just makes a lot of sense. And I hope that personnel-wise, I hope that they don't pay a running back like $16 million. But outside of that, I do hope that just on from what the Cowboys can do, I hope that the Chargers can emulate that from like a personnel standpoint in terms of how they approach kind of the draft, team construction a little bit more in the offensive way that the Cowboys have had, because really, you can point to the holes in the Cowboys team. The offensive line hasn't been as good as it, was historically, but like ultimately that's a team that can put up like 40 points on anyone. And, so, and the point where people want to say Kellen Moore was bad is obviously the Niners playoff game and stuff like that. But the whole month of December, the defense regressed, and that's why they lost games. Meanwhile, Kellen Moore was putting up 40 points on the Eagles, 34 points on the Jags, and just, having his way with teams. So, at the end of the day, I think that this is a really good hire for the Chargers, and I hope it makes them a more modern, potent offense compared to what they have been recently.
Credit to, just to fill in here real quick, not that everyone wants to hear me say it, but credit to the Chargers and those in charge of hiring for probably throwing a bag at Kellen Moore and for making this what really, I guess, probably ended up being the most desirable offensive coordinator spot available. I mean, because he would have had his pick, I would assume, outside of maybe, one spot or, with the Panthers, that Frank Reich already has, some guys in mind, but he probably had his pick, and within the span of a week, the Chargers probably throw a bag at him. So, kudos to the Chargers for getting that done.
Yeah, I mean, he was absolutely somebody that would have, his pick of the litter. Like, I think, we heard from quite a few people, obviously, that this was the best job, non-head coaching job in the league. That's Daniel Popper came on our show last week and said that, and several national reporters were saying that as well. And so it's, it's the draw of the job, right? But somebody like Kellen Moore, like, you're not just saying like, hey, come coach Justin Herbert. It's like, hey, like, you can have full autonomy of the offense here. And also, by the way, we're going to throw you a nice raise as well, because he was one of the higher paid offensive coordinators with the Cowboys already. And it would have been very easy for him to stick around in Dallas, keep working with the guys that he knows, and not have to pay state taxes in Texas, and be able to, have that kind of stability in Dallas. So, this isn't just like the Chargers are saying, hey, like, come work with Justin Herbert. Like, there are other draws to the job, and I'm sure that they were able to go out and be aggressive. And so this is a step forward for the Chargers organization as well, being able to go out there and get the big fish on the market and get him to come, be a Chargers offensive coordinator. Because I think, like, there's people who are going to be skeptical, right? But offensive coordinator candidates who have coordinated 3 top 10 offenses in the last 4 years don't become available very often, because those guys largely get head coaching jobs, or those guys largely are sticking around with their existing teams. And so this chance to have Kellen Moore come in is a chance to really take advantage of this window that the Chargers have built in with their roster and with Justin Herbert's rookie contract, and maybe salvage some of the past mistakes that, Joe Lombardi and company, and obviously Brandon Staley takes some fault there as well, have made over the last couple of years. So I don't think Kenneth Murray. I was going to say Kenneth Murray. I don't think Kellen Moore is a perfect offensive coordinator by any means, but I think if you were going to poll like league executives, hey, who are the top 10 play callers in the league heading into 2022? I think Kellen Moore would be on that list. Like, I genuinely believe he would. And the results have panned that out. And again, he's had to call these offenses in Dallas in a variety of different ways, with a variety of different pressures, built into his job. And now he's able to come in and build this offense in his own image, maximize Justin Herbert, and be able to get him back to being the quarterback that we all know that he can be. And so I'm just really excited, man. Like, I needed something like this. Like Alex was saying, I think Zach Robinson would have been a good hire. Like 100%. I think that would have made a lot of sense. A lot of scheme overlap there. Lots of philosophical, matches being made if that was the hire. But being able to get somebody who has that experience, who's been able to be successful in the league for an extended amount of time. Like, this isn't just like, hey, like, he's been an offensive coordinator and done it well for a year. Like, we have 4 years of evidence of him being a legitimately good offensive coordinator, legitimately good play caller. And I think people should rightfully be excited about this. Like, obviously, I understand the season ended in a very poor way, and people are still probably a little salty about it. But this, I think, is like best case scenario for the Chargers was being able to hire Kellen Moore after Frank Reich, got hired by the Panthers.
No, I was a broken, cranky 27-year-old fart when the season ended, and today I was just like, I think I'm excited again. Of course, I'm such a sucker. I know
they're reeling us back in, man.
Yeah, every time. Whatever. I already paid my deposit for my season tickets. I'll be there. No, I'm much more excited about. Again, like I posted today the Game of Thrones meme where I thought I was going to end up with one of the ugly daughters, and it turns out, like, oh my gosh, he's really attractive. I didn't expect it to happen, but hey, I'll take it. We needed something. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good.
Yeah, and I think kind of like Steven said, this is something that makes sense for Kellen Moore as well, right? We talk about Frank Reich. Apparently, Kellen Moore finished second for that job to Frank Reich based on what the media said. And Kellen Moore is going to put himself in a position, if he gets this offense to be top 10 and gets Justin Herbert kind of into that MVP, level conversation, to put himself in the, arena for head coaching jobs next year. Right. I don't want to like fire him already next year while, or promote him next year while he just got hired. But, that is how the NFL works, especially with the Chargers having a defensive coordinator as head coach and Brandon Staley with Justin Herbert. And so, I think this makes a lot of sense in the same way that, Frank Reich might have, had he not taken the Panthers job. So I think for Kellen Moore, this is a golden opportunity. For the Chargers, this is a golden opportunity. I'm not quite all the way back in on like buying Chargers hype yet, because the day before we did just hear about Brandon Staley and Justin Herbert's torn labrum, but this is ultimately a positive step in the right direction in terms of getting the kind of offseason the Chargers want to have. Although offseason champs doesn't matter, doing the playoffs.
Yes, absolutely, and excited to see that opportunity. So, I know that there were a lot of comments. Obviously, Brandon Staley said this, as well as Tom Telesco, being able to marry the run with the pass. Again, I do not expect this to be a 50-50 split going forward with Justin Herbert like it was in Dallas, and that whole Zeke situation. But the Cowboys have had basically a top 10 rushing offense in EAPA per play, DVOA, all of that stuff. 3 of the last 4 seasons, really the only season that they didn't was when Dak was injured. And so this is a step in the right direction in that regard as well. This is something that Brandon Staley talked about after the Chargers played the Cowboys last year and after the training camp, and just how impressed he was with the way that they were able to run the football at the Chargers in those practices in that game last season. And that's something that Daniel Popper rightfully highlighted today in his article. So, this is going to be great for Justin Herbert, but I think this is going to be equally as great for, the Chargers rushing attack and what they're going to be able to do schematically, and just how multiple they're going to be able to be, and some of the personnel changes as well. And we'll talk about some potential, coaching connections here in a second, but I just wanted to point that out. Like, this is going to be a big step in the right direction for the Chargers run game as well. Because, Kellen Moore does believe in that kind of validity and that power of being able to marry the run and the pass, not to the extent of 50-50 split, like I said, hopefully going forward. But, I would expect some changes in terms of the personnel, in terms of the tight end group, in terms of the running back group, because of the way that Kellen Moore wants to be able to run the football. So, that should be exciting. I love watching good rushing attacks. It's, as a former offensive lineman, like it's absolutely a pleasure of watching football. And so I'm excited to see that part as well.
Real quick, just to make sure I get it, because it's way back now. Michael Lopez sent in a super chat. Not too familiar with the type of offense Kellen Moore runs. Is it a West Coast type of scheme? Love the hire. I think he'll get the most out of Herbert.
Yeah, so this kind of falls into that thing that we were talking about earlier in terms of what coaching tree does he come from. I think he's in everything. Chris Peterson had this great quote that they don't have a system at Boise State. They have plays, and they believed that they were able to run any kind of offense. And I think that's kind of how Kellen Moore was able to run his offense in Dallas and be able to be multiple and run everything. And so last year, I want to say they were top 5 in terms of outside zone usage, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that is something that obviously will appeal to Brandon Staley. So there'll be a blend of a lot of different things here. And I think that's something that Brandon Staley has been trying to do with the Chargers and how he's been kind of built the coaching staff previously. So there's going to be a lot of West Coast stuff. There's going to be a lot of Shanahan stuff. There's going to be some Peyton stuff. There's going to be some Andy Reid RPO influences in there as well. So Kellen Moore is going to do a lot of everything for the Chargers. All right. First of all, let's talk some potential personnel adjustments that we might see, and then we'll talk about some coaching connections as well. Alex, obviously, we talked about they're not going to be interested in, or not going to be able to be interested in, Tony Pollard or Dalton Schultz. How do you think this hire might affect their overall kind of strategies going forward, and maybe even a little bit in terms of the draft?
Yeah, I think it'll put a higher emphasis on a speed receiver for sure. I don't know if that's going to be in first round or anything like that, but in terms of what the Chargers, kind of have laid out, I mean, you look at what Kellen Moore had in his offense, right? He had CeeDee Lamb, he had Amari Cooper there in Dallas, and obviously in terms of what the Cowboys were able to do sort of at their peak of Kellen Moore's offense, I just think speed is such a huge part of it. That doesn't mean, Kellen Moore can run his stuff with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, but if I had to guess, we've sort of had this debate of wide receiver or tight end in round 1 recently amongst Chargers fans. I think this makes wide receiver a little bit more likely than it does tight end, just given what Kellen Moore kind of wants out of his vertical passing game. We've obviously talked about the high ADOT and stuff like that, and what Kellen Moore was able to draw up in terms of the deep shots for guys like Cooper, Lamb in the slot, or even Michael Gallup on the outside when he was sort of, at his best as a player as well. So I think that kind of does point to wide receiver. As far as running back, I think that this probably is going to result in the Chargers getting a true RB2 I don't think that they've really had one. They've tried to sort of make Joshua Kelly one, right? And I think Josh Kelly for what he did was good, but at the same time, like you're not going to get like a Zeke Pollard kind of split like Dallas had in the backfield this year, combined with how they use Pollard in the passing game as well. But I do think they legitimately want someone to take the load off of Eckler, just because of what he's been carrying these last few years, and sort of reaching. I guess he is getting a little bit older, and so I think Kellen Moore's offense will kind of open up opportunities for other players. Don't trust Telesco to draft another running back, but I don't know if this puts them into contention in one potentially, maybe in free agency or something like that. I don't think it will be a Tony Pollard player. Obviously, the Chargers are $20 million over the salary cap, but I think they will try to find someone who's a true complement to Austin Eckler if it's not Joshua Kelly. Or, maybe Isaiah Spiller develops under Kellen Moore. There's some optimism for you based on how Isaiah Spiller's rookie season went this year. But I think that they're just kind of going to get faster, more sharper at the skill positions. And then I think tight end is important, right? We obviously saw Dalton Schultz the last month of the season really break out in Dallas. And if you can kind of get really good production out of your tight end spot, whether that's Gerald Everett or a guy that you go get in the draft, I think that would just make this offense so much better. So that is kind of a roundabout way of saying like everything will be better on offense. But at the same time, I think with how Kellen Moore, utilizes his running backs and wide receivers, there is probably a bit more of a pressing need now with hiring him as opposed to like Zach Robinson or some of these other guys, of running the offense he wants to run, as opposed to maybe you could kind of merge like a Saints Lombardi type scheme with what the Rams did if you did hire Zach Robinson and sort of like transition in that way. But to go from what Lombardi wants to do to what Kellen Moore wants to do on the other side of the spectrum, I do think that they need to add some speed to this offense pretty quick.
Yeah, they need to add all over. For what it's worth, although this isn't really a Kellen Moore thing as much as just a I'll bring it up thing. Arjun just posted a graphic of, the average 40-yard dash times for every wide receiver room. The Chargers were 5th slowest. The Cowboys were actually 7th slowest. They weren't that far off. Not that that means anything. Obviously, that means you should draft some speed. So I would expect that to happen this year and sort of know some things to put in the article. Anyway, so I definitely think that's on the way. To me, this really points to a tight end, honestly. One, because I know the team isn't super thrilled with their tight end room, and two, because like there's kind of this tradition with the Dallas Cowboys and tight ends with, you can go back to like, Jason Witten, but also Blake Jarwin or Dalton Schultz, now Jake Ferguson. Like, now those guys, I believe, weren't first round picks. I know Schultz and Ferguson weren't, but I do feel like a Michael Mayer is kind of in play here at 21 now, if he gets there. And it's certainly no coincidence that someone like Dane Brugler or Daniel Jeremiah are sending, tight ends to the Chargers in their mock draft. So I think that's possible. You don't have the numbers up for this past year. Well, I'm sure Arjun would have it. But in 2021, the Cowboys ran almost 310 plays, I think it was, out of 12 or 13 personnel. So they're going to have an emphasis on tight ends, whether that's Darnell Washington in the second or something, some guy in the 4th round to develop after Everett, or just going out and getting your, Mayer, Kincaid or something in round 1. I do think that if there wasn't already a need for a tight end before because of what we expected for the Chargers to do this year, I really think someone like Kellen Moore is going to go get another tight end at some point early in the draft.
Yeah, in terms of the wide receivers, I don't think that, like, I don't think they'd be opposed to taking like a Jalen Hyatt, or like a Marvin Mims, who are like these, kind of vertical field stretchers. I think that would obviously help things, make things easier. But if you look at like the types of receivers that they've had in Dallas, I mean, like, to me, I look at somebody like a Cedric Wilson, who, I think he ran I think he was like a low, like a high 4.4, low 4.5s kind of player. But he's a legitimate like yards after catch threat. Like he was, I think it was like 7th in the league in yards after catch per reception last year in 2021. I mean, he was averaging basically 7 yards after the catch in 2020 and 6.5 in 2021. And I think that is something that the Chargers would be able to find, in this draft, whether that be in the first round or second round. Like I think, somebody who can be that backside Z receiver and take a slant, 10 extra yards or something like that. So I think that is something that they're missing. They have their version of Michael Gallup and Mike Williams, somebody that can go up and get those contested catches, work that kind of vertical stretch aspect of the offense. They have their version of Amari Cooper and Keenan Allen. We'll see, obviously, if he's on the team or not, going forward. I would expect him to be with this kind of move. But they're missing kind of those yards after catch threats right now. Obviously, that's not Josh Palmer's game very much either. So maybe that makes somebody like a Zay Flowers a possibility at 21. I haven't watched him yet. He's probably not going to be my kind of receiver given his size detriments, but we'll see what happens there. But I do think we'll see heavy on the offense in the draft with the first 2 or 3 picks. Yeah, because of this kind of move. Like you're not going out and getting Kellen Moore and saying, hey, like as much as I would like an edge rusher at 21, and those 2 guys are going to be on top of my list. Like you're not going after a Kellen Moore if you're planning on going defense in the draft or something like that. So I would lean tight end and receiver in the first round. Whatever doesn't get picked in the second round, that's probably going to be the case there, and then we'll see what happens. Running back is really the interesting one because it's like, we know that Tom Telesco doesn't like to part from his draft picks. And, I think you could make a legitimate argument that more of the lack of rushing production for the Chargers is due to the poor scheme, due to the lack of cohesion up front, due to the lack of, true investment in terms of time on task from Joe Lombardi. And so I am curious to see if maybe they bring in somebody like a Skip Pete who has 20 years of experience. Maybe he looks at Isaiah Spiller, who he got to watch every single Saturday in Texas at Texas A&M, and says, hey, I can work with this guy. I can really, make him be a viable RB2. Maybe Joshua Kelly can kind of be the placeholder there. So that really is going to be the interesting thing from a personnel standpoint is what do they do at running back? Because Tom Telesco, we all know, like he's not going to want to put them in a situation where Isaiah Spiller is not getting reps. Like he's going to want Isaiah Spiller to get on the field. So that is going to be interesting, but I think the receiver room is going to look very different next year.
Yeah. I did want to push back on the wide receiver speed thing because if you look at the Cowboys this year, right, they're the 7th slowest per that graph that Arjun said. But that does come with the fact that they dumped Amari Cooper for salary, which I mean obviously reduced their speed. Michael Gallup coming off of an ACL in his return, and then kind of having to feed, like Noah Brown and Cedric Wilson and like these guys that aren't like naturally like super fast, right? So, I think that kind of comes with an asterisk because when that Kellen Moore offense was at its peak, right, you did kind of have, Amari Cooper in those like peak years, I would say like 2019, 2020, when like the Cowboys were sort of on top of the world in that respect. So, yeah, I do think they would want to have speed in the wide receiver room. I think a tight end and developing one is very important. And then, yeah, as far as the running back situation, it'll be interesting to see, I guess, how much they want to ride Austin Eckler out for, an entire season versus how much there is really like a premium on potentially getting an RB2 and really what their methods towards getting an RB2 are, because there's not a lot in free agency unless you want to overpay for Tony Pollard, which we know is impossible for at this point for the Chargers. But I'll be curious to see if there's any kind of like draft moves or like some, deep guy in free agency maybe they can get to sort of bolster the running back room relative to what it is now.
Yeah, that one's so fascinating to me because outside of Austin Eckler, who you got to be ready for that drop off to hit, and we almost saw that for a moment this year. But what do you do with the other guys? Like Joshua Kelly could be the RB2, wasn't stable. Isaiah Spiller was drafted to be one, and I think every time I see him on the field, I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be. But something in practice or whatever with Lombardi, I don't know. Things aren't working out, and obviously not Larry Roundtree. So it's tough because you've made the investment, but nothing's paying off. So do you continue almost like a sunk cost, just trying to keep investing into this running back room? At the very least, I do think they at least have the guy, the coordinator, the schemer, and hopefully the run game coordinator or running backs coach or whatever to make it work. Honestly, though, I don't think Bijan Robinson's in play. I think it's really just you go with Spiller, you go with Kelly, you find another fourth guy, and that's kind of how they roll. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think we could see them maybe draft a running back early in 2024, early by their standards. Like, I think maybe if you're sitting there in the second round and like a Zach Charbonnet from UCLA is like kind of staring you in the face, maybe you take that chance. But like, I think you have the chance at 21 to get a premium receiver, and this draft isn't necessarily loaded in terms of the wide receiver ability. So maybe you get the second receiver off the board at 21, which is never the case in the NFL draft these days. And maybe that is somebody that you view as a premium player. So I think there's a chance there, but running back early, I can't really see it, like I said, unless it's just somebody who they think is like truly a top tier prospect in the second round or third round or something like that. But I think that they'll look at bringing in Kellen Moore and bringing in a legitimate run game coordinator and really placing a proper emphasis on the run game and say, hey, this is good enough for now. Next year we'll address like the actual players, but for now let's fix the scheme. Let's fix the time on task. Let's get in more experienced coaches here, and see what we can work with Isaiah Spiller, Joshua Kelly, and Austin Eckler, because it's a talented room. It's just like Tyler is saying, it hasn't necessarily panned out that way. So wanted to address Joseph here with his super chat. I feel like we kind of addressed this. I'd be pretty surprised if they take defense in the first round, knowing that they hired Kellen Moore. I think if you're talking about a Zach Robinson, maybe you can still figure out a way to get an edge rusher. I would definitely not taking a safety in Brian Banch, in my opinion, from Alabama. And then there was another super chat here as well. And I had to scroll. Thank you. Michael Hodges says, hey guys, love listening to your chats. This is too early to talk about, but do you guys think we finally see two quarterbacks on the roster now that Lombardi is gone? Just throwing this out there, Cooper Rush is a free agent.
Cooper Rush expensive.
You think he's going to be expensive? He's been a practice squad guy for like 10 years.
And then he won some games.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there is a thing in the NFL where I think if you just have a backup who wins like a couple games, then like they sort of at least get the chance to probably like be a QB2 in like a quarterback competition the next year. So I would be surprised if someone brings in Cooper Rush to do that. For what it's worth, in Dallas, they always ran with 3 usually. Thinking in like, I know.
Yeah, because in 2020 they had Andy Dalton and Ben DiNucci after behind Dak.
Yeah, Dalton, Ben DiNucci, Gilbert Grape. I mean Garrett Gilbert. There's that one. So they've had a lot of quarterbacks kind of running through there and starting games and during COVID times and during when Dak was injured for sure. I don't know if it changes a whole lot. I think it could change definitely who the backup is. I mean, we saw that Chase Daniel was like kind of in this quarterback room like for that specific reason. I don't know if he'll be back this year with a new, OC, because I do think a lot of OCs do like to kind of like pick their backup quarterback just to have a guy in the room who like does that. We saw that with Frank Reich and Nick Foles in Indianapolis. So I wouldn't be surprised if Kellen Moore kind of wants to do a similar thing. Easton Stick's contract is expired. I wouldn't be surprised if the Chargers wanted to go 3 quarterbacks, get sort of a new veteran in like that Daniel role, and then maybe draft, I wouldn't be surprised if we got like a 6th or 7th round quarterback pick this year. That's just like a cheap 4-year contract, and they can just kind of plug into the quarterback room in that sense.
Yeah, I think that's fine there. Bolt Brett wanted to shout him out. He did obviously a great photo swap today. So he said, I don't know why, but it feels like Moore and Herbert could be roommates in a sitcom or something. They did do a commercial together for some kind of like auto company in Idaho and Oregon. Leighton Vander Esch is also in that commercial. So I guess we have some on-camera experience between Justin Herbert and Kellen Moore there.
It's natural chemistry.
All right. Briefly, I did want to talk about some potential coaching additions here. Obviously, they still have to hire quarterbacks coach. I assume that they want that to be also another passing game coordinator. To me, it makes a lot of sense to bring Gerard Johnson in from the Minnesota Vikings. He's been around Kevin O'Connell. He's been around Kyle Shanahan. And he was actually with Kellen Moore in Dallas in 2016 in the same quarterback room before Kellen transitioned to becoming a quarterbacks coach in 2017. So there's a lot of connections there. The Chargers have already interviewed him. They already know what he's about. I think that having two former NFL quarterbacks being around Justin Herbert, I think makes a ton of sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think you could also start grooming Gerard Johnson to be a future coordinator at that point as well. So he is somebody that makes a lot of sense to me. The Cowboys also released their quarterbacks coach, Doug. I forget his last name. He's an older gentleman, I believe. So there is obviously that connection as well.
I'll throw out Scott Tolzien, the quarterbacks or the coaching assistant to the Cowboys right now, who in 2011 signed with the Chargers as an undrafted free agent.
There we go.
Connections.
Alex, anybody you wanted to bring up in terms of potential coaching and hires here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Gerard Johnson makes a lot of sense if they want to go that way in the quarterback room. There's connections to Kellen Moore. There's connections to, obviously, the Chargers. And it just felt like when the Chargers made that interview, he wasn't interviewing for the OC job as much as he was interviewing potentially to be a quarterback's coach or somebody who was on the staff. And, you establish that pipeline. If Kellen Moore has a great year, he goes off somewhere else. You can bring in Gerard Johnson as your, QB coach to OC in 2024, right? You can kind of, establish that pipeline. And that's really, I think, what the Chargers kind of need to build here, especially, having an OC that is like Kellen Moore, who's going to be in consideration, I think, for head coaching jobs in the future. So, whichever guy they get, I think will be important in that respect. But I think you sort of go with what Kellen Moore wants, right? If he doesn't want Gerard Johnson and wants somebody else, you give him somebody else too, potentially from the Cowboys. Tyler mentioned Scott Tolzien. We'll see if there are any other names that kind of float around the QB coaching jobs. But just in general, I think you're looking for a guy that can, continue to work on Herbert's mechanics and stuff too. But I do think the QB coach thing is definitely more about the potential connections.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to see him bring in at least one of Skip Pete or Joe Philbin, the two guys who have really kind of headed up the rushing attack in Dallas. Obviously, Joe Philbin has been around the NFL for a very long time as an offensive coordinator, offensive line coach. He's did a fantastic job this past year. I mean, talk about some resume builders in terms of turning Terrence Steele into a above average tackle. I wasn't super high on Tyler Smith coming out of the league, and they turned him into their version of Jamari Sawyer, who could essentially play guard or tackle and be good at both spots. They brought Jason Peters out of retirement and was able to do a really good job in that regard. So one of those two I would really like to see come into the Chargers and be able to really bring that run game flavor and that proper emphasis on the run game. So I think one of those guys, if not both, I'll take both. Obviously, I think they're fantastic coaches, but one of those two I would really like to see Kellen Moore bring with him from Dallas.
Yep, I agree.
All right, we have another super sticker as always from Tyler's mom, Miss Andrea Shun. Appreciate that as always. So I think that's a good spot to end our show tonight. Alex, any final thoughts before we head out?
Nope, no final thoughts. Kellen Moore, great slam dunk hire by the Chargers. Hopefully he leads them, to the promised land in 2024, a different time. But I am the only thing that stands between you and Patrick Mahomes winning another Super Bowl with the Chiefs. So I'd like to invite you onto the bandwagon and root for the Eagles in the Super Bowl. That's really my pitch here. So join me. I know you think it's obnoxious on the show, but this is the one time where you need to root for the Eagles. So go Birds.
Yeah, go Birds. It's it's an easy thing for me. They have a bunch of Utah connections. I mean, obviously they have Kaiser White, who
Kaiser White
and Linval Joseph as well. So
Steichen.
Shane Steichen. There you go. Tyler, any final thoughts before we head out?
Thanks for reminding me of Kaiser White. My night is a lot worse now.
Well,
Sorry.
Look, I mean, we can take the victory lap. We were right on Kaiser White. And so, it didn't turn into wins for the Chargers, but we were right on Kaiser White.
Great. That was very true. So yeah, we were planning on doing a show on Wednesday to talk about a lot of the offseason offensive coordinator news. So we'll see what happens there. We'll let you guys know in terms of our upcoming schedule and our next show. But we'll be back into the swing of things, talking about all the offseason needs, free agency, draft coverage coming up in the next couple of weeks, and into April and all of the summer months as well. So stay tuned for all of that. Got a lot of fun things planned for you guys. So that's going to do it for us tonight. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Appreciate you guys as always. We'll see you next time.